All right, now talking of language, because this is very important for us now. I'm talking of also multiculturality, if we want to put it like that. Where do you see the role of parents in making sure that their children have a good grasp of their language? I'm not saying this is the only language that we are going to use to teach them now, because okay, they live in a society, they must be able to express themselves and communicate in the society that they live in. If they are born in France, okay, they should be able to speak French. They shouldn't only speak the language of their parents now. But it's going to be a huge error if they don't understand the language of their parents now. So where do you see the role of the parents in making sure that their children understand their language and also the language of the society where they live?
Okay, so I guess when you ask that question, are you thinking of African people who are living in European countries? When you
Yeah.
ask,
African people
okay,
in
in
the
that
diaspora, yeah.
situation,
Yeah.
okay, because that's where I was going to tailor my answer to, because I think that involves certain specifics. Okay, thank you for the clarification. For me, I think the role of parents, I don't think it's just parents, you know. I think you have to think about the larger community as well of African people. But in terms of specific things as parents, when we're choosing to live in, we have to be very, I have a child on the way. So, these are things that are discussed in our household. Funny, we were just talking about yesterday with my wife. But you have to look at what environments are you choosing to live in, and are these environments, are cultural spaces, culturally appropriate spaces, immediately accessible? You have to think about that, because sometimes our people were not thinking about that, right? You have to be very attentive to that. You don't want to be somewhere where you're like the only, sometimes some of our people like to be flies in buttermilk, or a fly in buttermilk. You can't do them things, right? You have to be very cognizant of that. I think sometimes we fall for that. So there's the social environment. Two, I think being part of social clubs and organizations catering to different groups of African people. So, for example, I like to be, one of the things that I think I benefited from being in Toronto is that there's different groups of African people. There's Nigerians, different groups of Nigerians, different groups of Ghanaians, etc. Right? And then different groups of Caribbean people, right? So I'm able to connect with different types of people and develop relationships with different people, because I think too often we want to have relationships with the society. When we really mean the society, we mean Europeans more than we want to learn about ourselves. And I think that's one of the things parents have to be very intentional about exposing their child to other African cultures, right? Especially when you're in those environments, like if you're in European countries like that, you're gonna see, different groups outside of your own ethnicity. So you have to be really willing to engage in that. And the third thing I would say is being involved in organizations that have a very clear, have your political interests at heart, that are really about, interest groups, basically being involved in the interest groups, not just only the socializing when you want to go party, but also in organizations that are very serious about group cohesion. Like, for example, I'm signed up for the Nigerian organization here and where I'm at now. Like, I don't only just go to only Jamaican things, right? Because I'm a Pan-Africanist, right? So we parents have to think like Pan-Africanists, not ethno-nationalism, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. It makes sense. All right. You see, there is one argument that I had with a guy a couple of years ago, and it had to do with the way that we organize our society living outside. No, in that there is this sense of what they describe as ghettoization among African people. When they go outside, they organize themselves, they stay among themselves, and this again require an understanding of the fine line. Where do we define when is it too much? When is it enough? When is it just average? Done. If you look at it from a certain sense, it deprives the people of being able to integrate into the society and able to benefit from opening more your horizon and instead of living in a small little ghetto, no. But if we look at it also from another, from the other end, that is also what keep the culture alive. Because if you just come into the society and you just go inside it with the way the European are proposing their own integration, you are going to quickly get lost. Because yeah, you become, yeah, you are an African, but an African that have been remade in Europe. When it comes to protecting our languages, what do you think we should do in terms of this society that we organize ourselves in the diaspora?
It's fundamental. You can't because could you imagine if, because we talk about getting into fitting into the society like French society or English society or whatever. You think that you think say the English could have had everyone speaking English if they had that lax mentality? Oh, we have to integrate into everybody's society. Could you imagine the welfare queen saying that, oh, we have to integrate to everybody's society. I need to learn an African language. Because notice, they don't talk about having to learn your languages or the languages of different African immigrants. They're telling you to learn theirs. So again, you've accepted, you might not see it that way. I'm not saying you, I'm just saying you in a broad sense. You might not see it that way, but in reality, you're accepting that inferiorization, that subordinate position. That's how multiculturalism is really, and one of the very metaphorical ways that I describe multiculturalism as it pertains to African people is I really think we should look at multiculturalism as a European zoo of exotic things. And I have this Jamaican exhibit I can go to, and this Nigerian exhibit I can go to, and this Congolese exhibit I can go to. We're more like things in a museum for them. That's what it's about. So that's how I see it from their perspective. That's how they see it, right? But so that's another thing with this multiculturalism thing, because why? The reason we end up in these spaces is because of European exploitation of African countries in Africa and the Caribbean right now. That's the defining reason, right? The main reason, if not the only, right? So I think that's important context to keep in mind. So when you talk about, the importance of speaking, you have to speak your language, and you have to create institutions that reinforce the importance of your language. So when let's say, because a lot of this issue comes up with jobs, how are we going to get a job if we speak this way? Well, if you have your own institutions, be it social, economic, or political, you don't have to worry about that. But you have to be willing to build those things. You know what I mean? Right? You have to be willing to build and create those spaces. But sometimes we don't want to do the building part. We just want things right away. Right. We just want like that.
Just to
right
enjoy.
that, right that. But look at Indian and Chinese, right? And it's not because I think Indian and Chinese are smarter or anything than African people. It's just they haven't experienced enslavement and colonization the way we have. So when it comes to certain basic things about cohesion, we're dealing a lot with Eurasianization in terms of that more than they are because of the enslavement experience. So we don't often think in terms of group preservation or racial preservation. We often don't like thinking in those terms, right? But other groups do it, right? And that, again, that's a result of conditioning. It's a very deep, there's a lot invested in keeping African people confused. There's a lot of investment at it. That's systematic, right? So I think that's important because think about it. If you go to open a school, for example, you want to open an African school, like an Afrocentric school or education space for children, and you say, look, we need people who speak African languages, this, and that African languages, right away, who's going to be able to be employed? Other African people. And who's going to be attending? You see how simple that is? When you just stick within your own culture, it's your immune system. It just spreads throughout. But a lot of times, because, and I'm a victim of this, right? We're all victims of this in varying degrees, but nonetheless, victims of this, we often know so much about other people than we do ourselves. We don't see oftentimes the power of being ourselves. And I know you had an expression for this, and I said I was going to teach it from you about, we'd be a better inferior, I think you said.
That when we try to imitate other, we can become the best. The best we can be is to be inferior.
Right. Yeah.
Be inferior up there.
Yeah, the best inferior or something you said like that. We get like, because it's silly, like, because the reason why I said it's a good concept, it's an unfortunate situation, but it captures, it's part of that problem when you fall into these arguments with people. Sometimes I try to avoid those arguments, as I get older and a bit wiser, and seek like-minded people, as that can be challenging given the conditions, but I get it done. But I think that's sometimes what we get caught up in. We don't realize how much that affects the way we're responding. Because like I said, you're saying, oh, I don't know if I'll get a job doing this. Well, why don't you make a job that you can do that? Change the conditions. Sometimes we accept the terms rather than changing them for our own interests.
All right. Now, with your research, what do you do? Okay, I understand that you are teaching at the university. Expose your content to the people so that in a way that they can better understand. No, I'm not talking of your student now. I'm trying to understand if you have other way of outlet of your research to get it to the people.
Other outlet, well, one, coming on platforms such as yours, where we can have casual, candid, but informative conversations. That's one way. That's something that I've been doing, I've been involved in, in terms of being accessible. And that's primarily one thing I want to get into. I haven't been doing, I should do, but I think once I'm a bit more organized, is maybe even doing short writing pieces or short commentaries, as I was just being part of organizations and giving my input in that way with people who I'm organizing with. For example, you talked about, Garveyite organizations. I'm part of an organization, Afrocentricity International, where we have, several chapters throughout the world. In fact, recently we're just celebrating opening an African Renaissance temple in Abidjan in Cote d'Ivoire, right, where African people, can practice our own spiritual systems and a lot more than that, but be engaged in, practice our culture and grow from it, right? So we're so big up to AI, right? So we're able to do things like that. So there's that. So I think once we are thinking in an organizational capacity, how we organize around our culture, right? I think things become easier. I think that's really the key.
To conclude the conversation today, because we've talked about a lot of interesting things known about the languages and also how it relates to us in our culture and our expression and the way we interact with other people.
Final statement. African people, we need to learn our languages. They're fundamental to us re-Africanizing and de-whitenizing. And it's important that African people in the diaspora realize the way they talk is not bad talking, not inferior English or inferior French, but it is an African language, right? It's reflection of the African in us. We're not African influenced, we are African. I think that's very important.
Thank you so much. That is really powerful. I appreciate the time and also the contribution.
All right, I love being on here.